Welcome back to Huckabee. This is our special Republican Presidential Forum. And joining us now is Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Congressman, good to have you here. Thank you very much.
Nice to be here.
Your first question comes from Ken Cuccinelli.
Ken, okay.
Congressman, you advocate for pure constitutionalism. Given that filter, what do you think are the three primary domestic responsibilities of the federal government?
Domestic responsibility.
Responsibility.
Protecting the borders, providing a sound economy, a sound currency. That's in the Constitution very clear, and it's a major issue. And really, in enforcing the Bill of Rights, I mean, those are very specific and looking at all, and that would be property rights as well as freedom of speech and all those other things. So those would be the major issues. Of course, the Constitution overall would be a major issue as well.
Congressman, good evening to you. In 1995, we lost 168 Oklahomans in a domestic terrorist attack. My Assistant Attorney General, Melissa Houston, is a survivor of that blast and has spent many years after that utilizing tools of the Patriot Act, fighting domestic terrorism. You have come out opposed to the Patriot Act based upon constitutional privacy concerns, and I too share some of your concerns with respect to privacy. But what substantive or thoughtful alternative do you have to the Patriot Act to prevent further acts of domestic terrorism in the future?
Well, the one thing is that you set your goal as preventing all crimes and all criminal acts. I mean, you destroy liberty by doing that. But the Patriot Act, if it would have been called the repeal of the Fourth Amendment, it wouldn't have passed. That's essentially what that does. So that's way too much sacrifice of liberty. But, you know, there are laws in the books for violent acts. But if you think you can pass enough laws to prevent all crimes and all acts of violence, just think of the acts of violence occur in our households. You know, accidents, are you going to put cameras in every household or whatever? So there are, and I don't think it's a lack of laws that is our problem.
So, Congressman, you don't believe that there needs to be a comprehensive law at the federal level equipping law enforcement to prevent domestic terrorism in this country?
I don't believe we need a comprehensive law at the federal level. I believe we need state laws against violence. The one law that we do have at a national level that we totally ignore, and that is that terrorism is a crime and it's not a war. And yet we have drifted off to being called this is a war on terrorism, and it's a justification to pursue war not only around the world but even domestically. So I would say it's a crime. But the Constitution, I think, is very clear. There's nothing in our Constitution that says that violent acts should be a prerogative of the government. They didn't offer a national police force. I mean, even today, I mean, if you're talking about criminal acts of violence, murder, manslaughter, robbery, that's all a state issue. This nationalization of law enforcement, I mean, we have already 100,000 federal bureaucrats carrying guns. We don't need any more federal policemen. And I think that the problem isn't a lack of federal laws and federal policemen.
Congressman, what would you call the attacks right around the corner on the Twin Towers in New York City? What would you call those? Well,
that's an act of violence, and it's a criminal act.
Is that an act of terrorism, Congressman?
Yeah, it's a terrorist attack, and we do have responsibility when, you know, from protecting our borders and all, but it's an act of terrorism, and we have responsibility. We should be checking our borders and finding out who's coming in, but we ought to understand that whole problem rather than just saying that what we need is more federal policemen, and it's a lack of federal police activity and federal guns that will make us safer. But if you don't understand exactly the motivation and all the problems of why we're facing this crisis and why people want to come here and kill us, just more laws won't do it. I mean, this whole thing is all messed up because what we have been told for 10 years is that people want to come here and commit acts of terrorism against us because we're free and prosperous. As long as people believe that, believe me, you're not going to solve the problem. You're not going to make the people any safer.
We don't want you to run out of time. Different topic, Congressman Paul. President Obama has had the audacity to say that the Republican approach to the economy means dirtier air, dirtier water, and less people with health insurance. Is that really what less federal regulation means?
Hardly. Matter of fact, I get charged with that all the time, because I don't want the federal regulations, and most Republican conservatives don't need or think we need more federal regulation. They say, oh, you're going to have, people in the streets and no medical care. The whole thing is, if you don't have regulations, say in the environment and different things, or regulations on banking regulations, actually the market is a real strict regulation. It's a stricter regulation. Our problem today is when you write the regulations, say on drugs, the drug companies get involved and they write the regulation. Banking regulations are written by the banking community. They become the lobbyists. So it isn't the lack of regulation, but if you have the market, you have property rights, you have contract rights, and you have bankruptcy laws, and those are strictly enforced. It wasn't the lack of regulations that caused the Enron scandal, but it was the market that took care of it. Those individuals were convicted in Texas court for fraud, and they went to prison. So, no, we have to answer back. I think we do a lousy job on that, saying that the liberals grab the moral high ground and say that we're going to take care of everybody. If you don't do it, people are going to be suffering. There won't be any medical care. So it is up to us to argue the case that the market can answer that. The free market and property rights can solve just about all these problems much better than more bureaucrats in Washington.
Congressman, we have to take a break at this point. We will come back more with Congressman Ron Paul right after this break, so stay with us. Let's continue with Texas Congressman Ron Paul, and for the next question, Scott Pruitt.
Congressman, you have said on Fox News Sunday that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are unconstitutional. I presume that means that you will eliminate those programs. How will you do it?
You think so? Yeah, I do believe.
So tell me how. Tell me how.
You all work on Obamacare, and you talk about it being unconstitutional because there's a mandate. But how many other programs in medicine we have? They're all mandates. Does anybody get not to have to pay Medicare taxes? I mean, it's all. No, I look at Article 1, Section 8. Where does it say anything that the government should be involved in education or medicine? So the question is about how do you get rid of it?
How do you do it?
Well, you can't do that overnight. Matter of fact, I go to extreme of saying that for those individuals who have been totally dependent, children and the elderly right now, to start with that to cut our budget because we have such this horrible budget crisis, I said would be just create anarchy. It would be so bad. But if we want to save this country, we have to cut. So I have a program where I want to cut $1 trillion. It's a bunch of it comes from overseas, and a bunch of it comes from 5 departments. Going back to the budget of '06, actually, I would preserve some of these programs. And when I present this program, I says, for the purpose of phasing them out. For instance, my program actually allows people under 25 to get out of Social Security. But to cut that off and make that, and think you can do that overnight, isn't going to work. So you have to have a transition program. But technically speaking, they ask me, are they constitutional? No, where is the authority? I don't know where the authority is. There's no authority for 1 penny being spent at the federal government to run education. And I think that that's why we're in such this trouble. There's no respect at all for the Constitution.
Congressman, if you're very clear you think they're unconstitutional, why would you sign a budget that contains something unconstitutional?
Because other than that, you have 2 choices. You either can work our way out of this, or you wait until it collapses and we have to rebuild it. And I'm just saying that you can't. Even on the Federal Reserve, everybody knows my position on the Federal Reserve, and it's unconstitutional, but I don't advocate that you close down the Federal Reserve tomorrow. I advocate competing currencies and work out it, so I have transition programs.
Okay.
And that makes a big difference.
Okay, let me move to another topic. Which comes first in your mind, the sovereignty of the people, the sovereignty of the states, or the sovereignty of the federal government? And please put them in order.
Well, the people in the states and then the federal government, and very little for the federal government, and none for international governments like the UN and NATO to get authority for the things that we do around the world.
Okay.
Congressman, are there any amendments to the Constitution that you believe are mistakes?
That I believe what?
Are mistakes.
Are mistakes?
Yes.
Well, there was one.
Try to keep it to a few.
Pardon me?
Try to keep it to a few.
I'm not quite hearing you. What you're saying?
He said try to keep it to a few suggestions.
A few.
Yes.
And you said to amendments to the Constitution.
Yes.
Yeah,
You feel like
okay.
they were mistakes.
Well, one of the worst was the Prohibition, which led to a horrible decade, and then we repealed that one. The repeal one was very great. So no, there's not. I mean, obviously the Bill of Rights; those are amendments, and they're great. So there's. The other ones are sort of not enough for me to get riled up about, but I'm so concerned about not following the Constitution that we have on property rights and rule of law and the monetary issues and going to war issues. Those are the kind of things I'm very concerned about in the Constitution.
We're in our final minute, by the way.
Short on time, quick question. If you could suggest every American read one book, what would it be?
One book. Excluding something religiously oriented.
Could be. It could be.
Well, I think to simplify things, to get a message out, since we're talking about politics and the law, people, if they want to read a short book to really wake them up on what the law should be, they should read a book called The Law by Bastiat. If they read that and find out the moral principle behind law, saying that you as an individual can't do certain things, but if you can't do it, the government can't do it. If you can't steal from your neighbor, you can't send a politician to steal from your neighbor. The law is a basic principle worth starting with, and I think it would introduce a great idea to a lot of people.
Thank you, Congressman Ron Paul, and also we will have a chance to visit with you at the end of the forum. Well, each of the 6 candidates have had equal time to answer our panel's questions. Now they're joining us all once again, and each of them have exactly 1 minute each to give us their final thoughts for tonight. Our next candidate is Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Congressman Paul.
Thank you, Mike. Tonight we talked a lot about the relationship of the federal government with the state government, and we realize it's such a mess because we've turned the Constitution on its head. Today, the federal government is very big and the states are very little, and it is a consequence of our carelessness with the Constitution. Our Congresses, our courts, as well as the executive branch, have taken over too much of the power. Now it falls upon the states because they are suffering the consequences, and the states have this responsibility to do something about it. But one issue that I think that we have to revisit, because the founders understood it, but we have forgotten about it, and that is the principle of nullification. If the federal government won't respond, and I would, if I can, I would respond in a favorable way of reinstituting the principle of nullification. The states have to be able to nullify this. This would reverse the trend, and this would stop the usurpation of all the powers and privileges from the states to the federal government.
Thank you very much, Congressman Ron Paul.